Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about using proverbs like we did in the last episode to start off how we're going to discuss the topic of the day. So like I said, the channel is about using something Creole or from the culture of St. Lucia, Creole culture of St. Lucia, as a starting point and expanding outwards. So we're using proverbs, and the proverb of today is Si l'on vend lache pour pencher. That is Creole. So this again in Creole is, the proverb is Si l'on vend lache pour pencher. I'm going to translate that into English. In English, what this means is it depends on how the wind blows. The chicken's or the rooster's tail will bend. Once again, si l'on vend lache pour pencher means depending on how the wind blows, the chicken's tail will bend. So what we're going to use this to talk about today is de-dollarization. So basically, there's been an effort to move away from using foreign currency like the US dollar and the British pound. And this has now become a trend. So explaining this, depending on how the wind blows, the chicken tail will bend. It now shows us that there is a movement or a general flow towards de-dollarization, which is now picking up steam. So I'm going to show a few clips, and then we're going to have a look at it from different perspectives and different pundits talking about this movement of de-dollarization, which appears to be a trend which many countries are now beginning to follow. So let's go ahead and have a look at this.
Another subject that's getting some attention this week is what I'm now told is de-dollarization, and it's the question about whether the U.S.'s reserve currency is at least losing market share. There's a report on the Bloomberg that actually last year it lost market share at 10 times the rate that was the average of the last 20 years. Should we be concerned about the U.S. dollar's position as the reserve currency for the world?
David, first, with great respect to the Bloomberg organization, losing share at 10 times the previous rate is a classic how to exaggerate with statistics thing. If it was only losing a share at a tenth or 0.2% a year, then 10 times in the previous year wouldn't prove anything at all.
So yeah, we just looked at the idea on Bloomberg that this pundit is saying that this is nothing. So now we're going to look at another person talking about this idea of de-dollarization.
It looks like the de-dollarization concept is getting momentum, with a lot of African leaders talking about changing their currency, having a united one currency.
I have no time for borders. Why? I have no time for colonialism.
So here we have somebody else from the African Diaspora channel introducing the idea of African countries moving towards de-dollarization. Finally, we will look at another aspect of this where somebody else is talking about de-dollarization. And this is 10 Asian countries de-dollarizing. So as you can see, the United Nations is facing setbacks. So as you can see, there were a list of Asian countries or Asian countries that have decided to move away from the US dollar or the British pound. So de-dollarization basically is the movement away from using foreign currencies in US dollars and British pounds by developing countries to pay for their imports or on the international scale of importing and exporting. Now, when these countries have been using these foreign currencies to purchase and not using their local currencies, the interest rates fluctuation has been causing them a lot of problems, and subsequently, or in short, their monies have been devalued because of the rising value of the US dollar or the British pound. So especially now with the war in Ukraine and the sanctions on Russia, countries were like, well, the developed countries like America and the US can use their currency as a bulwark or as a bargaining chip to squeeze countries if they have currencies or reserves in the British pound or the US dollar. So they're looking for an alternative. Some of the alternatives spoken about by the BRICS, which are Brazil, India, Russia, and South Africa, and many other countries have asked to join that group. But some of the other currencies talked about are using the yuan or the Chinese currency, or also Indian currency or the rupees. But at this point, this is just something that has been talked about, or movement has been started, a trend to move towards an idea of either creating a new currency that is not US dollar, British pound, or euro that these countries can use as a reserve or as something to purchase on the international stage, to commodities and so forth and so on, because these reserves that the US and the Europe are in control of can be used against them proven by what they did with Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine. So right now, this is a trending topic, something called de-dollarization. Most pundits believe that this is just more noise than actual fact, that there cannot be much movement away from the US dollar and the British pound because there is no alternative, and then most countries like the idea that the US dollar and the British pound are stable currencies, and they rather, at the end of the day, US and Britain being in charge of their currency than say India or China, for example. So this thing will not really come to fruition. But this is the idea. So we used the proverb from the Creole island of St. Lucia, or Creole proverb, which says, si l'on vend la chi pour le pencher, or it depends on how the wind blows, the chicken's tail will bend. So it's just saying the idea of a trend. And so we're highlighting a trend, which is the idea of de-dollarization, which many developing countries from Africa to Asia are talking about in an effort to move away from the US dollar in particular as their reserves or as a currency that they're using to import and export in the international trade, because they find that it's not beneficial to them, and fluctuating interest rates can sink their economies as well. So there you have it. Depending on how the wind blows, the chicken's tail will bend. Helps us look into the idea of trends and flows. And lastly, I will add that this proverb points out the fact that the wind is inconsistent in the sense that it is not something that is predictable. So the unpredictability of a blowing wind and the idea that people should be up for changing and going with the flow. So maybe now we're living in a very unpredictable time, and that these countries are now following the flow or the unpredictability of the global international monetary system. But we must also consider that there's new technologies like cryptocurrency or digital currencies coming into play, which is probably giving the ability for other countries to consider technological alternatives, and are also trying to build other monetary alternatives to try and move away from the US dollar and the dominant currencies that has been ruling the world for the last few decades. Whether this will come to fruition is not known, but yes, this is the trend or the flow that is blowing, the winds of change are blowing across. So if you like the content, please hit the like button, subscribe, check again to see if you have been delisted or unsubscribed from the subscribe line, and like the content so I can bring you a lot more. Thank you for watching this episode, and see you around for the next one.